The 10th plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before proceeding further, I would like to remind members that masks are to be worn by all attendees at the times when indoors, except when directly addressing a meeting. Due to the temporary closure of the east side emergency doors, in the event of fire or an emergency which requires an evacuation, please use the west side emergency doors and the stairway next to the elevator banks. Those in the 3rd and 4th floor balconies, please use the stairway next to the elevator banks. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency José Ramos Horta, President of the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste. I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the Excellency, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency José Ramos Horta, President of the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President. It's an honor to return to this Assembly of Nations once again as President of my country, for which I was re-elected 5 months ago. I'm conscious of time, so we have distributed my full speech, and I will skip over many pages as courtesy respect to this Assembly. Like almost every country on the planet, Timor-Leste endured multiple climate change catastrophes, prolonged dry season, followed by floods, the COVID-19 pandemic, and now the global economic impact of Russia-Ukraine-NATO confrontation. We had minimal direct impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in terms of hospitalizations and fatalities. More children died of dengue than COVID-19. But the policies we undertook to prevent the spread of this insidious virus, such as curtailing free movement of people and goods, inevitably impacted on the livelihood of rural and urban people across the country. Farmers and traders suffered the most. To protect our children, we closed down schools, even though we knew that this decision would have serious detrimental consequences for the hundreds of thousands of our children and youth who had to miss school and miss out on the 1 meal a day program, which provides a meal for every child in schools across the country. In the very early days of the onset of the pandemic, our health authorities and WHO and other UN agencies on the ground scrambled, worked hard day and night to prevent the much feared virus from killing our people. Thanks to the prompt actions taken by the government, supported by our partners and friends, we avoided a public health crisis. Australia proved to be a true sisterly neighbor, promptly delivering every assistance our fragile health system required. We are deeply grateful for the speedy, generous action taken by the Australian government in deploying medical specialists, ventilators, and intubation equipment, training local staff. When a vaccine became available, Australia provided us beyond our needs, enabling the vaccination of more than 72% of our people, including children, in record time. Government and civil servants who at times move at a tropical, leisurely pace quickly drafted a COVID prevention and economic recovery strategy, which included cash transfers and food baskets for every low-income household. We are grateful to COVAX for the initial shipments of vaccines. We are grateful to New Zealand, Republic of Korea, Japan, China, the European Union, Portugal, and the US for their generous support in kind and cash. In a world plagued with conflicts and man-made catastrophes, from Myanmar to Afghanistan to Yemen to Ukraine, Timor-Leste is an oasis of tranquility. Common criminality is very low. Armed robbery is unheard of. We do not have organized crime. Our Catholic majority population, 98%, and the Protestant and Muslim brothers and sisters communities live side by side in total harmony. Timor-Leste does not have a single case of ethnic or religious-based tension and conflict. In 2023, Timor-Leste will hopefully gain WTO accession, another natural extension of our country's regional and global economic integration. ASEAN and WTO accessions are driven by Timor-Leste's own economic interests, such as domestic economic reform process, to ensure healthy, enabling environment for FDIs and national investment and diversification of our economy. ASEAN membership is a strategic imperative, as important as Timor-Leste's stability and prosperity, as much as peace and prosperity in Timor-Leste should matter to ASEAN. As much as peace and prosperity in our neighborhood benefits all, conflicts or threats of and risks originating in one country inevitably impact on others. At independence 20 years ago, we had only 20 medical doctors. Today, we have more than 1,200 doctors for a population of 1.5 million. These would not have been realized without Cuban solidarity. At independence 20 years ago, life expectancy was less than 60. Now, a Timorese woman can expect to live beyond 71 years of age. Connectivity will surge in the next 3-4 years, as Timor-Leste will be linked by several submarine cables to Australia, Indonesia, and beyond. As it is, we already have a high percentage of mobile and social media users, and we are experimenting in the exciting digital and e-government. Excellencies, I wish now to touch upon 3 matters of profound concern. The extremely serious food crisis affecting millions of people in Africa and Asia. That's one issue. I hope that all have read carefully the letter of our esteemed Secretary General dated 13 August 2022, addressed to all heads of state, which provides with clinical precision exact figures on the number of our fellow human beings, women and children, youth and elderly, in several African countries, in Yemen and Afghanistan. The World Bank Food Commodity Price Index, which reached a record high in nominal terms during March-April 2022, went up by 15% between April and May 2022, and is more than 80% higher than 2 years ago. Add to this the recent devastating floods in Pakistan, inflicting heartbreaking suffering on over 30 million people. Aid to poorer countries of the South should not be cancelled out to be reallocated to address the refugee crisis caused by the war in Ukraine. In 2015, donor countries reallocated their ODA commitments to the North African, Syrian, Afghan, and Iraqi refugee crisis flowing into Europe, causing an estimated 15% drop in total aid. The potential for a diversion of aid now is even greater, after $345 billion were estimated as needed for the reconstruction of Ukraine. We must ensure that the Ukrainians are supported, but not at the expense of unity with the many struggling people in other nations. In the aftermath of the 2008-2009 subprime crisis, which had knock-on effect across the globe, hundreds of billions of dollars were quickly mobilized to rescue exposed European and American banks. Draconian fiscal austerity measures in the forms of cuts in public expenditure and higher taxes were forced upon the workers and middle class in the crisis-affected Western countries. But rarely are we able to inspire the rich to show the same level of compassion and wisdom towards the poorer South. I always believe that we are part of the great human family, yet some seem to feel that we are not really equal. We are not part of the same human family. since part of the world lives in dazzling citadels while their billions of distant relatives live in poor global neighborhoods. The Western countries and others started off on high moral ground in confronting Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but may end up losing the support of the developing world, which, after all, are 80% of the global population. They should pause for a moment to reflect on the glaring contrast in their response to the wars elsewhere, where women and children have died by the thousands from wars and starvation. The response to our beloved Secretary General's cries for help in these situations have not met with equal compassion. And we are now faced with ruinous situations in terms of the rising cost of living for the poor. This has already resulted in riots in Sri Lanka, Peru, Kenya, and most recently in Haiti. Low-income countries were able to spend only a fraction of the amount spent by the high-income countries on COVID-19 stimulus packages. 20% of GDP for high-income countries, 6% for middle income, and 2.5% for low income. As a result, many countries had to increase their debt. Debt levels now limit us in protecting the weakest and most vulnerable from the effects of rising prices, let alone allow us to increase our efforts to address the climate emergency, which threatens our very existence. The number of developing countries in debt distress or at high risk has doubled since 2015 to 60%. But equally, I want to address our cries for solidarity and fraternity to the billionaires and the trillionaires of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. There is more liquidity in Asia than in Europe and the USA combined. It is time for the richest families and corporations of the so-called Global South to gather in a historic summit hosted by our esteemed Secretary General to commit themselves to a vision and plan of action to rid Asia, Africa, and Latin America of extreme poverty, child malnutrition, provide clean water and sanitation to every poor community, vaccines, basic public health, better education facilities, and better housing with renewable energy and connectivity for better access to education and business. This can be done by the rich of the Global South. All it requires is vision, great hearts, audacity, and understanding that investing on the poor of our own countries, we're investing in peace. Lastly, I want to talk about the situation in Myanmar. The people of Myanmar feel abandoned, betrayed by the so-called international community. They ask why the difference in treatment, prompt and extremely generous support for Ukrainian civilians and refugees, so much sophisticated military support for Ukraine resistance, and such a mute reaction to the war waged against the people of Myanmar. The Myanmar conflict is impacting the security and stability of neighboring countries. It may escalate. There has to be dialogue by all involved in the conflicts in Ukraine and Myanmar and in other crises around the world. The Tatmadaw cannot claim it is defending itself from external aggression. In the Ukraine conflict, Russia and Ukraine should clear the ports and sea routes and allow normal resumption of permitted international shipping activities, following on the breakthrough in the grain and fertilizer agreements brokered by the Secretary General. As there are extremely limited number of credible neutral global leaders, the UN Secretary General and High Envoys of his choice should work hard day and night to reach a humanitarian ceasefire agreement and a provisional peace agreement. The ultimate goal will have to be a comprehensive, permanent peace agreement. What it should be aimed now is a temporary cessation of troop movements, military action, humanitarian air and land corridors, and zones for unimpeded humanitarian assistance, and resumption of export and import activities. Russia, Ukraine, and NATO countries have to swallow their pride, review their past policies that led to this mutual suicide, back away from each other's borders. Let Ukrainians rebuild their lives, their country and lives. Let Russians retreat with security to their borders. I thank you, Your Excellency.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Paul Henry Sandaogo Dafmiba, President of Faso, Head of State, President of the Council of Ministers of Burkina Faso. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Paul Henry Sandaogo Damiba, President of Faso, Head of State, President of the Council of Ministers of Burkina Faso, and invite him to address the Assembly.
Monsieur le Président,
President,
Monsieur le Secrétaire général des Nations Unies,
Secretary General of the United Nations,
Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs de
ladies and
délégation,
gentlemen, heads of delegation,
distingués délégués,
distinguished delegates,
Mesdames et Messieurs,
ladies and gentlemen.
Monsieur le Président Zaba Kourouzi,
President
je voudrais,
Zab
avant tout
Shaba
propos,
Kuroshi,
vous adresser mes
at
vives
the
et
outset, I
chaleureuses
should like to
félicitations
congratulate you
pour votre brillante
warmly
élection
for your
à la
election
présidence de la
to
77e
the
session
presidency of the
ordinaire
77th session
de l'Assemblée générale
the
de
General
l'Organisation
Assembly
des Nations Unies.
of the United Nations.
J'ai l'assurance que votre grande expérience,
I am sure that your great
votre bonne
experience,
connaissance du système des Nations Unies
knowledge of the
et
United
votre
Nations
engagement
system
bien connu en faveur de
your
la diplomatie
commitment
multilatérale
to multilateral diplomacy
seront le gage du succès de votre mandat.
will ensure the success of your
Je
mandate.
puis à présent vous assurer du plein soutien
Allow me to assure you
de la
of
délégation du
the
Burkina
full
Faso
support of the delegation of
dans
Burkina Faso
l'exercice de votre lourde charge et
in
pour le succès.
exercising your
nos
mandate
travaux.
and
Mes
achieving success in
félicitations
your
vont
work.
également à l'endroit de
I
votre
also
prédécesseur,
congratulate your predecessor,
Monsieur Abdullah Shahid,
Mr. Abdullah Shahid,
pour la manière remarquable avec laquelle
for the remarkable way
il a présidé les travaux
in which he
de la 76e session
presided over the work
ordinaire
of the
de
76th
l'Assemblée
session
générale.
of the General Assembly.
À Monsieur Antonio Guterres, secrétaire général de
To Monsieur
l'Organisation des
Antonio
Nations
Guterres,
Unies,
the Secretary General of the United
je
Nations,
réaffirme
I
solennellement
hereby
la
reaffirm
reconnaissance du Burkina Faso
the
pour son
gratitude of
engagement
Burkina Faso
constant,
for his constant
résolu et
commitment,
renouvelé
always
faveur de la
resolute
paix,
and renewed
de la
to
sécurité et
achieve
du
peace,
développement.
security and development.
C'est l'occasion pour moi de saluer en
I
ces
seize
lieux
this opportunity
la tenue du
to
sommet sur la
commend the
transformation de
holding of the
l'éducation
summit on transforming education,
qui a permis une large mobilisation des
which
acteurs
allowed
du monde de
for
l'éducation.
mobilization amongst all stakeholders in the world of
espérer
education, and
Que l'engagement
I
des uns et
cherish
des
the
autres
hope that
dans la
commitment
mise
on
en
all
œuvre des
sides
conclusions
towards
de ce
implementing
sommet
the conclusions of this summit
contribuera à
will
accélérer de
contribute
façon
to
significative
significantly
les
accelerating
progrès vers une éducation de qualité
progress
pour
towards
tous,
high quality
en
education for all,
particulier dans les pays du Sud.
particularly in the countries of the South.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs, le
President,
thème général de la
ladies and
77e
gentlemen,
session,
The theme
de
of the
l'Assemblée
77th
générale,
session of the General Assembly
je cite, une nouvelle ère,
is
des solutions porteuses de changement
a
pour
new era
relever des
of
défis interdépendants,
solutions
fin de citation,
to interlocking challenges.
révèle pertinemment l'urgence et le devoir de
And
responsabilité
this
historique
reveals the urgency
des acteurs
of the
politiques,
historic
économiques et
responsibility of
sociaux de notre temps
economic, social and political
face aux multiples crises auxquelles le monde est
protagonists.
confronté.
The world is facing numerous challenges.
En effet, alors que le monde se relève progressivement de la
As we are
pandémie de
gradually
la
recovering
COVID-19,
from the COVID-19 pandemic,
d'autres fléaux tels que le
other
terrorisme,
scourges such as
les
terrorism
conflits intra- et
conflict
interétatiques,
between and within
ainsi
states
que les crises humanitaires et
and the
alimentaires qu'ils
humanitarian and
engendrent,
food crises
les
resulting
changements
from this,
climatiques et
climate
les effets
change
pervers continuent de marquer
and
douloureusement
its effects are
la vie du
continuing
monde
to
au
hit
quotidien.
our daily
Ces
lives.
fléaux viennent nous rappeler
And
notre
these
fragilité
scourges remind us
individuelle
of our
et collective,
individual and collective fragility
l'interdépendance des pays et des
and the
peuples
interdependence of
et
countries and
l'impérieuse
peoples
nécessité d'une
and
solidarité
the
internationale.
imperious need for international solidarity.
Si nous tenons à préserver l'humanité
If we wish
d'un
to
péril
preserve
collectif
humanity
et
from a collective
inéluctable,
and unavoidable peril,
nous ne devons pas
we must
ignorer
not
ce
ignore
rappel.
this call.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs,
President, ladies and gentlemen,
la fin de la guerre froide nous a donné
the
de
end of the
rêver,
Cold War
d'espérer en l'avènement d'un monde
allowed us to
consensuel
dream and to hope
et
for
recentré autour
the
des valeurs
advent of a
cardinales de paix,
consensual world
de justice,
based around the cardinal
liberté,
values of peace,
de
justice,
démocratie
liberty,
et de solidarité.
democracy and solidarity.
Ce fut un leurre, car nous assistons,
But
hélas,
this was not the
depuis un
case,
certain temps,
because unfortunately
à
for
une
some
recrudescence du
time now we have
nationalisme
seen a resurgence
et
of
du repli de
nationalism
soi à certains endroits
and
de la planète,
inward-lookingness,
à un recul de la
around the
liberté et
planet.
de la démocratie à d'autres
a
endroits,
reversal of liberty and
à la
democracy,
volonté de certains pays d'imposer leur vision
a
du
will on
monde
the
aux
part of
autres,
some countries to impose
au
their
jeu
vision
des
upon others,
rivalités et de la confrontation entre
to give in
puissances
to rivalries
pour le contrôle
and
politique,
confrontation between powers
militaire
for
ou
political,
économique
military
de
or
certaines
economic
parties du
control
monde.
of certain parts of the world.
Bref, des acteurs de la communauté internationale étalent aujourd'hui
Members
au
of the
grand jour
international
leur
community
vision d'un
are
monde unipolaire,
talking about their
monocolore,
great vision of a
conforme à
unipolar
leur idéologie et à
single-colored
leurs intérêts.
world which is in line with their
Il est
ideologies and
impérieux de se
interests.
ressaisir et de
It is
développer en
crucial
nous
that we
la force de ne pas succomber à ces
stand up
tentations.
to this and
Privilégions
develop the strength
plutôt
within
l'esprit de
ourselves not to succumb to
solidarité
such temptations. We should
en
rather
faisant en sorte que la
ensure we have
diversité
a
du
spirit of
monde soit
solidarity
préservée
so that the diversity of
et
the
que le
world is
principe de
preserved
l'interdépendance des
and that the
peuples,
principle of the
où
interdependence
chacun
of
peut
peoples,
contribuer à la gestion des
where
affaires du monde,
everybody can
soit une
contribute to
réalité.
managing world affairs, becomes a
En
reality.
effet, le Burkina Faso
Burkina
est
Faso
profondément convaincu
fully believes
que la chance de survie de l'humanité
chances for the
réside
survival
dans
of humanity
l'acceptation et l'usage
lie in
ingénieux
accepting
de nos
and
différences et de nos
properly
diversités.
making use of our differences
Loin
and
d'être un
diversity.
facteur d'antagonisme ou
This should not
d'hostilité,
be a factor leading to
elles sont une belle
antagonism or hostility,
opportunité
but rather
de
the
complémentarité et
ideal
de
opportunity
solidarité
to find complementarity and
qui
solidarity
nous est gratuitement
And this is
offerte
being given
pour
to us on a
promouvoir la
plate
coexistence
to promote
pacifique et le développement
peaceful
durable.
coexistence and sustainable development.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs,
President, ladies and
les
gentlemen,
principaux défis auxquels notre monde
the main
est de nos jours
challenges our
confrontés
world is
sont
facing
bien connus
today
de tous.
are well known.
Ils ont principalement pour nom paix et sécurité,
They consist mainly of
démocratie
peace and
et développement
security,
durable,
democracy and
changement
sustainable
climatique
development,
et environnement,
climate change and environment,
santé et
health
éducation.
and education.
Nous pouvons ensemble et seulement
We
ensemble
can,
relever ces
together and
défis.
only together,
Pour cela,
meet these
nous
challenges.
devons essayer d'aller au-delà de nos intérêts
To do this,
individuels
we
et
need to move
particuliers
beyond our own
souvent facteurs
individual
de
interests, which often,
pour entretenir des
lead to
relations
crises
apaisées les uns envers
in
les
order
autres.
to ensure a serene relationship
J'invite
with one
donc
another.
solennellement
I
tous les
therefore
acteurs de la communauté
invite
internationale,
all actors
qu'ils
and
soient du
protagonists
Nord
of
ou
the
du Sud,
international
et
community,
quel que
whether
soit
they
leur
come from the
niveau de
north or the
puissance
south and
politique,
whatever their levels of
économique
political,
ou
economic or
militaire, à
military power,
s'inscrire dans une telle démarche. Monsieur le Président,
to join in
Mesdames et
with this
Messieurs,
movement.
certaines
President, ladies
questions
and
reviennent
gentlemen,
depuis plusieurs années
for
déjà
several years now, a number
l'ordre
of
du jour
questions have been
de chaque
returning
session de
regularly to
l'Assemblée
the
générale.
agenda of the General Assembly.
Au nombre de celles-ci, on note les questions de la
These
Palestine,
include the questions of
du Sahara
Palestine,
occidental, de la
Western
dette,
Sahara,
des changements
debt,
climatiques,
climate
de
change,
l'embargo contre Cuba,
the
de la
embargo
guerre en
against Cuba,
Ukraine
the war in
ou
Ukraine,
encore de la réforme du Conseil de
and
sécurité.
Security Council reform.
Pour la résolution de chacune de ces questions, le
In
Burkina
resolving
Faso,
each
par
of
ma
these
voix,
questions,
recommande vivement
Burkina
la
Faso
prééminence du droit,
recommends the preeminence
l'exaltation de
of
la justice
the
et de
rule of
l'équité
law,
et le
justice
triomphe
and
du bon
equity,
sens.
and the triumph of
Monsieur le Président,
good sense.
Mesdames et Messieurs, à présent, je voudrais
President,
dire
ladies
quelques
and
mots
gentlemen, I should like now to say a few
sur la
words about the
situation de mon
situation
pays.
of my country
Les idéaux de la
and the
transition
ideals
politique
of the political transition
a cours
underway
en
there
ce
at the
moment
moment.
en lien avec le thème
in line
très
with the very
pertinent de la
relevant
présente session
theme of this
de
session of the
l'Assemblée
General
générale
Assembly
et les objectifs poursuivis par la Charte des
and
Nations
the
Unies.
objectives of the Charter of the United
Le
Nations.
24 janvier 2022,
On the 24th of January
groupe de jeunes
2022, a
patriotes
group of young
s'est vu contraint de
Patriots
prendre ses responsabilités dans la gestion publique des affaires de
had
l'État.
to stand up and assume their responsibilities in the public
Bien
management of
entendu,
state
à la
affairs,
dérive de la gouvernance politique en place,
given the
à l'insécurité grandissante dans notre pays, à
problems
la
facing the
désintégration
current
progressive
position
et continue de l'État,
current governance,
en mettant un
increasing
terme à
insecurity
un
in our
régime
country, and the
démocratiquement élu,
gradual continued disintegration of
chaotique.
the state by setting up a
Loin de nous
democratically elected
toute
but
idée de nous
chaotic
justifier
regime.
ou
Far be
d'encourager
it
des
from us
pratiques de
to justify
déstabilisation ou de
ourselves or to
violation des
encourage
ordres
practices of
constitutionnels.
destabilization or the violation of
En effet,
constitutional order.
Si dans l'absolu, le mouvement du 24
Indeed,
janvier dernier est
whilst
illégal
the movement of the
et peut
24th of
être
January
répréhensible
is
au regard des
illegal
principes
in
chers aux
absolute
Nations
terms
Unies
and perhaps
et à la
reprehensible in
communauté
terms of the
internationale dans
principles
son
held
ensemble,
dear to the United Nations and the
nous
international
pensons que
community as
cette
a whole,
interruption
we
de
do
l'ordre
believe that
constitutionnel
this interruption of
au regard de ce
constitutional
qui
order,
prévalait était nécessaire
given
et
the prevailing
indispensable.
situation, was necessary and
Elle
indispensable.
était surtout
It was,
une
above
question
all,
de
an
survie pour
issue
notre
of
nation.
survival for our
C'est
nation.
pourquoi ce mouvement axé sur la
Which is why
sauvegarde du
this
territoire et la
movement,
refondation
centered upon
a
safeguarding
connu
and
une légitimité
recasting our
populaire et
territory,
réelle
met
dans
true
l'opinion
popular
publique
legitimacy
de notre
within
pays.
public opinion of our country.
Ces enthousiasmes et adhésions
This
populaires
enthusiasm and
prévalent
public
encore
support
aujourd'hui
still
à
prevail
l'endroit des autorités de la transition que
with
je
regard
conduis
to the
depuis maintenant 8
transitional
mois.
authorities who I have now been leading for 8 months.
En effet, la situation sécuritaire au Burkina
Indeed, the
Faso
security situation in Burkina
a connu
Faso
un début de dégradation en
began to
2015
deteriorate in
avant de
2015,
culminer en
with this
2020
process
et
culminating
2021.
in 2020 and 2021.
Les récents événements qui ont perturbé
The
la marche
recent
démocratique
events
de mon
causing
pays
upheavals in the
sont le
democratic
résultat de l'absence de réponse idoine
process of my
à cette
country are the
crise
result of a
sécuritaire
lack of responses to
et
the
d'une gouvernance
security crisis
politique
and
calamiteuse
to disastrous
qui ont
political
engendré, entre
governance,
autres,
which led inter alia
le plus
to
grand nombre
the
de
greatest
déplacés
number
internes
of
dans l'histoire
internally
politique
displaced
de notre
persons in the
pays
political history of
et
our
de notre
country and
sous-région,
our sub-region.
soit 1
That is
520 12 personnes à la
1,520,012
date
people
du 31 août 2022,
on the 31st of August, by the
une
31st of
crise
August
humanitaire
2022.
et alimentaire
As
sans
well as a
précédent,
humanitarian and food
dans l'histoire de notre
crisis which
pays,
were unprecedented in our
la
history,
fermeture de plusieurs milliers
and the
d'écoles
closing of several
et
thousand
un demi-million
schools
d'élèves
and
privés,
500,000
d'enseignement et
pupils
d'éducation,
deprived of teaching and
un
education,
marasme économique
and an
induit
economic
par le
abyss
ralentissement,
caused by
sinon
the
l'arrêt de
slowdown or
plusieurs
indeed
activités
the
économiques
halting of a number of economic
telles que
activities such
l'exploitation
as mining,
minière, le tourisme,
tourism,
l'hôtellerie,
catering
l'agriculture,
sector, agriculture,
l'élevage, le transport,
livestock,
etc.
transport, and so on.
Ces difficultés sommairement décrites
These difficulties,
s'inscrivent dans un contexte
described
sécuritaire
so briefly
sous-régional
here, are part of a
marqué
sub-regional
par des
security
attaques
context
des
which is
différents
affected
groupes
by
terroristes
attacks from
qui évoluent
numerous
dans le Sahel,
terrorist groups in the Sahel,
notamment le Sahel
particularly
central,
the central Sahel
qui
region,
comprend
which
le Burkina
includes
Faso,
Burkina Faso,
le Mali et le
Mali,
Niger.
and Niger.
Néanmoins,
Nevertheless,
pour y faire face, le
in
gouvernement de
order
la
to
transition,
tackle this
comptant
problem,
a
the
priori
transitional
sur
government
de nouvelles
is
initiatives
counting
endogènes,
on new
a pris ses responsabilités
endogenous
en élaborant
initiatives
un
and
plan
has
d'action
assumed its responsibilities
reposant
by
sur 4
establishing a plan of
objectifs
action
stratégiques
based
déclinés
around
comme suit.
4 strategic objectives.
Premièrement, la
As
lutte
follows.
contre le
Firstly,
terrorisme et la restauration de
combating
l'intégrité du
terrorism and
territoire.
restoring the integrity of the territory.
Deuxièmement, la réponse à la
Secondly,
crise
a
humanitaire.
response to the humanitarian crisis.
Troisièmement, la refondation
Thirdly,
de l'État et
the
l'amélioration de
restructuring
la
of the state
gouvernance.
and an improvement in
Et
governance.
enfin, la
And
réconciliation nationale et la cohésion
National
sociale.
reconciliation, social cohesion.
Pour atteindre ces objectifs
In order
stratégiques,
to achieve these
le
strategic
gouvernement de la
objectives,
transition a
the
pris
transitional government
les
has
initiatives
taken the
majeures
following
ci-après
major initiatives.
D'abord, la réorganisation du
Firstly,
dispositif de
the
sécurité
reorganization
nationale
of the national security
et des
mechanism,
actions fortes et vigoureuses
and
sur le
strong,
terrain contre le terrorisme et les groupes
robust
armés,
actions on the ground against terrorism
la
and
lutte
armed
contre
groups,
la radicalisation, les discours
combating
haineux
radicalization,
et la
hate
stigmatisation des
speech,
communautés,
and the stigmatization of certain communities.
la mise en place d'une politique de
Implementing a
déradicalisation
policy of
et de
de-radicalization
réinsertion
and
socio-professionnelle
socio-professional
des
reintegration
combattants repentis des
for
groupes armés,
former combatants from armed
le
groups.
soutien à la réinstallation et à
Support
l'insertion
for the
socio-économique
socio-economic
des personnes
reintegration
déplacées
of
internes
internally displaced
et des
persons and
personnes
those
affectées par
affected
le
by
terrorisme.
terrorism.
Et enfin,
And finally,
la lutte contre la corruption,
combating
la
corruption,
promotion de la justice
promoting
et de l'équité,
justice and
ainsi
equity,
que l'éducation
and
à la paix et à la citoyenneté.
education around peace and
Toutefois,
citizenship.
La seule volonté ou la simple détermination du Burkina
However,
Faso
a simple determination
lutte
or
contre
will
le
in
terrorisme
Burkina Faso to
ne
combat
suffiront
terrorism
pas
will
à
not
elles
be
seules
enough
à
alone
produire des
to
effets
produce
durables ou
lasting or
irréversibles
irreversible
dans ce domaine.
effects in this area.
Le soutien de la communauté
The support of the
internationale est
international
indispensable
community
et
is
attendu.
crucial and
Ce
highly
soutien est
expected
surtout
in this
urgent
regard. This
car la
support is
position
all the more
géographique du
urgent
Burkina
because the geographical
fait de
position
lui
of
un
Burkina
verrou pour
makes it
freiner
into a
l'expansion du
linchpin
terrorisme
for halting the
vers les
expansion of
pays
terrorism
côtiers
towards coastal
comme le Bénin,
countries such as
la
Benin,
Côte d'Ivoire,
Côte
le
d'Ivoire,
Ghana et le Togo.
Ghana and Togo.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs,
President, ladies and gentlemen,
la stabilité, la
the
sécurité et la paix
stability,
au Sahel
security and
ne
peace
sont pas
of the
seulement une
Sahel are
affaire des
not
pays de cette
only
région.
a matter for the
Dans
countries
la
of that
mesure où la
region,
situation qui
in the
prévaut
sense
aujourd'hui
that
dans
the
les pays
prevailing
du Sahel
situation in the countries
est
of
la
the Sahel
résultante, faut-il le rappeler,
is the result, I recall,
d'une migration du phénomène du
of a
terrorisme,
migration of the
nord
terrorist
vers le
phenomenon
sud du
from the
continent.
north to the south of the continent.
Ce qui se passe
What
aujourd'hui
is
au
happening
Sahel,
today in the
de
Sahel,
par ses effets transfrontaliers,
because of its cross-border
est un
effects,
problème
is
qui
a
met en
problem
jeu la paix et la
which
sécurité
imperils
internationale.
international peace and security.
Dès lors,
It
il
is
est
therefore
important que la communauté
imperative for the
internationale s'en
international
préoccupe
community
et s'en saisisse davantage.
to take
Les
greater account
efforts
of this and
jusque-là
tackle
déployés
it. Efforts
sont certes
deployed
salutaires,
thus far
mais restent
are
en deçà
welcome,
des
but
attentes au
fall
regard de
below
la réalité du
expectations
terrain.
regarding the realities on the ground.
Au demeurant,
I
je
should
salue
like here
l'initiative
to
du
welcome the
président de l'Union
initiative of the
africaine
President of the African Union
et du
and the
secrétaire
Secretary
général des
General of the
Nations
United
Unies
Nations
de mandater
to
le
mandate
président Mamadou
President
Issoufou
Mamadou Issoufou
pour conduire
to
une
lead
mission
a
d'évaluation
joint
stratégique
strategic
conjointe
evaluation
Union
mission
africaine
between
ONU
the African Union
sur
and
la
the
sécurité
UN
au Sahel.
on security in the
Une
Sahel.
mission
This
qui
mission
devrait aboutir à
should
l'élaboration
result
de
in
recommandations
establishing recommendations
sur la manière de renforcer
as to
la réponse
how
internationale
best to
à
bolster
la
the
crise
international
sécuritaire au
response to
Sahel.
the security crisis in the
Et ce,
Sahel,
en vue d'y trouver une solution globale et
with a view
durable.
to achieving a global and
Je
enduring
lance
solution.
un appel aux
I
partenaires techniques
call
et
upon
financiers,
our
bilatéraux
bilateral
et
and multilateral
multilatéraux,
technical and financial
pour
partners
soutenir le plan d'action
to
de la
support
transition
the transitional action
adopté
plan
le 6 mai
adopted on
dernier.
the 6th of May.
Le Burkina Faso
Burkina
espère un
Faso
appui de ses
hopes to
partenaires
receive
au
support
développement
from these development partners
afin de combler
so as to
un gap d'environ
close
4
the gap of
milliards
around 4 billion
575 millions de dollars
575
US
million
sur un
US
budget
dollars
total
out of a
de
total
18
budget
milliards
of 18
64 millions de
billion
dollars
64
US.
million US dollars.
Le gouvernement a également entamé
The government
l'élaboration
has
d'un programme
also
d'urgence de la
launched
transition
the establishment of
qui sera
a
consacré aux projets prioritaires
transitional emergency
innovants
program,
et
which
à
will be
fort
devoted to
impact sur les
priority
conditions de vie des
projects of an
populations
innovative nature with a great
pour
impact on
lesquelles
the daily lives of our
il compte
people.
sur la
And we are
mobilisation
counting
des
upon the
amis
mobilization
et
of
partenaires du
our
Burkina Faso.
friends and partners to do this.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs,
President, ladies and gentlemen,
les autorités de la
the
transition au
transitional
Burkina Faso
authorities in Burkina Faso
sont
are
conscientes
aware
de leurs
of our
responsabilités devant le peuple
responsibilities
burkinabé
to the Burkina
et de leurs
people
devoirs
and
vis-à-vis
our
de la
duties
communauté
to the
internationale.
international community.
Qu'il soit clair pour tous,
Make
elles
no
ne s'y
mistake about this.
déroberont
We
pas.
will not evade these responsibilities.
Conscientes de leurs responsabilités,
The transitional
les
authorities are
autorités
aware
de
of
la
their
transition sont
responsibilities, therefore,
parvenues le
and
3 juillet dernier
achieved and managed on
à
the
un
3rd of
compromis
July to
dynamique
reach a
avec la
dynamic
communauté économique
commitment
des États
with
de
the
l'Afrique de
Economic
l'Ouest
Community of West African States,
sur une durée de la
ECOWAS,
transition fixée à
regarding
24 mois
timeline
pour
for the
compter du
transition,
1er
which will
juillet
last for 24
2022
months from the 1st of July
et la
2022
nécessité de
onwards,
mettre en place
and also the need
un
to
mécanisme de suivi
establish
d'évaluation de la transition
follow-up, a
autour
monitoring
des
and
indicateurs
evaluation
relatifs
mechanism
à la
regarding the
sécurité,
transition
au retour
and
des services de
security
l'État dans
indicators,
les zones occupées,
as well as
ainsi
the
qu'au
return of
retour
state
des personnes
services
déplacées.
to occupied areas
Je
and the
reste
return of
convaincu
displaced persons.
que des avancées
I
significatives
fully
dans ces
believe
trois
that
domaines
significant progress in these areas
permettront
will
de
allow
créer
us
les
to
conditions
put in
favorables
place
pour la
conditions
tenue
favorable to the
d'élections
holding
crédibles
of credible,
et transparentes
transparent
en vue d'un
elections
retour
with a
à
view
l'ordre
to a
constitutionnel
return
normal.
to normal constitutional order.
Ces avancées ne seront possibles
Such
que grâce
progress
à
will
un
only
appui
be
conséquent
possible
de la communauté
thanks to
internationale
significant support from
que
the
j'appelle de tous
international
mes vœux
community,
du haut de cette tribune.
upon whom I call
Je
from
saisis
this
par ailleurs
rostrum.
l'opportunité que
I
m'offre cette
also
tribune
seize the opportunity offered
pour
to me here
remercier
to thank
tous les partenaires
all
techniques et
our
financiers
bilateral, multilateral
bilatéraux,
and private
multilatéraux et privés
technical and financial
qui
partners
nous accompagnent
who
ou
have
qui ont
been
promis de nous
supporting us
accompagner.
or who have promised to support us
Je voudrais également inviter
in the
ceux qui ne
future.
l'ont pas encore
I should
fait
also like to invite
à
those
se
who have not
décider
yet
pour
done
nous
so
rejoindre et
to
nous
take the
accompagner dans
decision
notre
to
élan
join
de
us and to
reconstruction
support us in
et de
our
consolidation de notre
reconstruction
tissu économique,
and in consolidating
social
our
et
economic,
sécuritaire.
social and security fabric.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs,
President, ladies and gentlemen,
les populations de nos pays,
the people of our
Qu'elles soient
countries,
riches ou
whether they be
pauvres,
rich or poor,
puissantes ou faibles,
powerful or
ont
weak,
besoin d'un monde sécurisé
need
et en
a
paix
safe,
où
peaceful
chacun peut
world
vivre en
where
toute
they can
quiétude
all
et exercer
live
pleinement ses droits.
serenely and fully exercise their
Or,
rights.
la région du Sahel,
However, the
aujourd'hui,
Sahel
est un
region
concentré de
today
groupes armés
is a
qui
hotbed of
sévissent à
armed
travers le
groups
monde.
who are holding sway
Ces
throughout
groupes
the world.
constituent une menace
These groups are a
qui
threat
pèse non seulement sur la
not only
sécurité de
upon the
cette région,
security of this region, but
mais
also
aussi sur la sécurité
upon the
du reste du
security
monde.
of the rest of the world.
Si rien n'est fait pour venir en aide
If nothing is done
de manière
to
décisive
come to
et
their aid
urgente
decisively and
aux pays de
urgently
cette région,
in the
l'on
countries of
court
this
le risque
region, we
d'une
run the
déflagration
risk
du terrorisme dans les pays du
of
Golfe
a
de la Guinée,
resurgence of terrorism in
Golfe
the
de Guinée,
the countries of the
puis
Gulf of
sur
Guinea,
le reste du
and
monde,
then in the rest of
à
the
commencer
world,
par l'Europe,
starting in
continent le
Europe,
plus proche
which is
de
the
l'Afrique.
closest continent to Africa.
Aucune mesure de précaution ou de
No
prévention ne pourra
precautions or
empêcher le
prevention
terrorisme de
measures will prevent terrorism
outre-Atlantique
from then
si le
crossing
Sahel
the
est abandonné
Atlantic
à
if
lui-même.
the Sahel
Et
is
rien,
abandoned.
absolument rien ne pourra
And
retenir
nothing
la
at
jeunesse
all
des pays du
will be
Sahel
able to
et
stop
ses environs
the youth in the
contre les
Sahel
tentations
countries
des
and its
immigrations
surroundings from
périlleuses en Europe
giving in to the
à travers le
temptation
Sahara
of
et la
perilous
Méditerranée
immigrations to Europe through
si cette
the
jeunesse
Sahara
n'a
and the
plus
Mediterranean
d'espoir sur
if
ses
this youth
propres
has
terres.
no longer any hope.
Monsieur le
staying at
Président,
home.
Mesdames et Messieurs,
President,
Le
ladies
Sahel.
and gentlemen,
dans les malheurs que lui inflige le terrorisme
the
est
Sahel
devenu le
is facing
théâtre de
many
rivalités
afflictions
stériles
due to terrorism and
et
it's
de
become
convoitises indécentes
an
qui
arena for
exacerbent la
sterile
situation.
rivalry
Mieux
and greed,
que ce
which are
spectacle
exacerbating
désolant,
this
les
situation.
pays du Sahel ont plus besoin de
Rather than just
solidarité et
looking
d'aide.
at this bleak
D'aide,
spectacle, the
mais
countries
pas
of the Sahara
n'importe
rather
laquelle.
require solidarity and
L'aide dont nous avons
assistance,
besoin
but
est
not
celle qui nous aide
just
à nous
any
départir de
assistance and
l'aide.
aid.
L'aide qui tue
This is the
l'aide,
kind of
c'est cette
assistance which
forme
allows us to
d'aide
move away from aid. Aid killing
qui
aid
est
in a
conforme
way
à
which,
nos
and this is
convictions
the kind of
et celle
assistance
qui
which is in
respecte
line
notre
with our
dignité.
convictions and respects our
Monsieur le
dignity.
Président, Mesdames et Messieurs, je
President,
voudrais
ladies and gentlemen,
terminer mon propos
to conclude,
en invitant encore
I
tous
should
les
like
acteurs de
once
la
again
communauté
to invite
internationale
all those
plus
in
de
the international
solidarité
community to
les
exhibit
uns
greater
envers les autres,
solidarity to one
car c'est la
another.
meilleure
This
façon de
is the
relever les
best way
défis
to meet the
de
challenges
notre temps
we face in our
et de
time
préserver les intérêts de
and to
tous.
preserve the interests of all.
Raoul Folero
Raoul
disait que nul
Folero
n'a le droit
said
d'être
that
heureux tout
nobody
seul.
has the right to be happy alone.
Alors, faisons en sorte
So let us
qu'il n'y
ensure
ait plus
that there are
d'enfants mal
no
nourris et sans
more
éducation
ill-fed,
ni
uneducated children
qu'il n'y ait plus de jeunes sans
that there are
formation
no
et sans
young people
emploi,
without training and without
qu'il n'y ait
jobs,
plus de paysans sans terre
that there are
pour
no
vivre
longer
dignement,
those
qu'il n'y ait
living in
plus
rural areas
de
without lands
travailleurs
allowing them to live
opprimés
with
dans leurs
dignity,
droits,
that there are no longer
que
workers who are
l'abondance
oppressed and lose their rights,
des uns ne soit pas la cause du
that
dénuement
abundance
des
for
autres,
some does not mean
que la
lean years
force
for
ne
others,
prévale pas sur la vérité et la
that
justice,
force does not prevail over
et
truth
enfin,
and justice,
que les raisons de notre
and
égoïsme
finally,
ne
that our
l'emportent jamais sur
selfishness
les exigences
never
de la dignité de l'homme et des peuples.
predominates over dignity for
Le Burkina Faso,
humankind and for all peoples.
je vous en conjure, ne ménagera aucun
I
effort
can assure you that Burkina
pour
Faso will
apporter
spare
sa
no
contribution
efforts to provide its
à
contribution to
l'édification d'un
building
monde
a
meilleur,
better, more
paisible,
peaceful and
solidaire et
prosperous world
prospère.
in solidarity.
Je vous remercie.
I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of FASO, Head of State, President of the Council of Ministers of Burkina Faso, for the statement just made, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Nikos Anastasiadis, President of the Republic of Cyprus, and I request the protocol to escort His Excellency. On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome His Excellency Nikos Anastasiadis, President of the Republic of Cyprus, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, with only a few months left of my 10-year tenure in office, I stand before you to address the plenary session of the General Assembly for the very last time. I would have wished nothing more than for this address to have been a reflection of positive developments in what humanity has had to face or is facing. Like all of you, I would like to have applauded the results of the implementation either of the provisions of the UN Charter or of the decisions and resolutions of the General Assembly and the Security Council, which would have assured that any threats or attempts to bring into question the sovereignty, territorial integrity of any UN member state had been brought to a complete halt or minimized. That long-standing conflicts, disputes have been resolved or were in the process of being resolved in accordance always with the decisions and resolutions of the United Nations. That the need for the organization's reform would have led to the effective prevention of new threats and challenges to world peace. That through its new role, the UN would have implemented projects to effectively combat hunger and to improve the living conditions of hundreds of millions of people in dire need of aid. That the number of refugees and migrants forced to flee from their homes due to conflict or poverty would have been greatly reduced. That further, we would have been able to tackle social and economic exclusion, lack of adequate healthcare standards, and shortage of educational opportunities. That sustainable development would have finally become a reality of all countries and regions in need by establishing the necessary political and socio-economic conditions which led to stability, economic growth, and institution building. That measures for the prevention of climate change and its devastating consequences would have been implemented consistently by all parties involved. That terrorism and religious fundamentalism would have given way to tolerance and understanding. That the trillions of dollars spent on destructive weapons would instead have been spent on actions and programs aiming to bridge the gap between rich and poor states. And finally, that multilateralism would have been the guiding doctrine of all states. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in addressing the General Assembly in 2018 and referring to the weakness of dealing with the same problems, I had wondered, and I'm quoting, how is it then that we come back again and again, year after year, as a kind of ritual, to attest to the dismal lack of effectiveness for some and the embellishment attempt for others for what is in fact our inability to fulfill the aims of the UN Charter. And I was continuing, why do the decisions of the Security Council remain in their overwhelming majority sheer certificates attesting violations? Why is international law and international agreements not implemented? Why do strategies and programs aiming at creating better conditions for people that are suffering remain wishful thinking? Esteemed friends, although I'm well aware that what I am about to say is well known to all of you, for the sake of history, I cannot but relay some truths which are leading to a declining path and gradual loss of credibility of the United Nations, an organization which was formed right after the Second World War to prevent new disasters, provide protection and hope to those in need of effective protection and action against all the challenges I have already mentioned. I know that what I'm saying may be outside the bounds of diplomatic etiquette, but I do believe that the obligation of each leader before history is not to overlook failings and shortcomings in favor of wishful thinking or flattery. That is why I will proceed with a review not just of the reasons which have transformed the organization into a repository of problems, but also to what states are required to do in order to provide credibility to the organization, as well as the ability to effectively impose international legal order or to consistently implement decisions and programs for the benefit of humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, in my opinion, the weakness and inefficiencies of the United Nations is due to, first, the fact that the international law is preceded by financial or other interests of powerful member states. Second, that despite the end of the Cold War, alliances based on common interest lead to tolerance towards states which violate international law if the offender is under their sphere of influence. Third, the resurgence of hegemonic tendencies by some states with the aim of creating new empires at the expense of smaller states and in violation of international law. Fourth, despite the declared intention of the Secretary General of the United Nations to proceed with the much needed reform and modernization, as well as its modus operandi and decision-making process, the lack of willingness on the part of the aforementioned states has not allowed for the implementation of such a change. And fifth, as a result of the same political expediencies, the United Nations, unfortunately, adopts an equal distance stance even when faced with the violation of decisions, resolutions, and defined scope and terms of reference specified to the Secretariat. This, my dear friends, results in emboldening offending states which not only disregard international law, but also create new precedents outside the framework of legality. Mr. President, I have set out the main reasons for the lack of effectiveness and also the weakness of the UN to live up to the expectations of billions of people. I know I may be considered as a romantic ideologist, but I believe that recent events and problems affecting the world do not leave any choice other than the taking bold but necessary decisions, such as identification of the causes that lead to unnecessary rivalries and conflicts, and renewal of our commitment to a global order based on international law. A global order which ensures that peace, security, human rights, and sustainable development remains the highest values which we undertake to preserve and hold. B, political will and determination to proceed with the reform and modernization of the UN to a just and efficient multilateral governance system. And this reform and modernization process becomes even more imperative and urgent with the imminent danger after 77 years of a new world war following the Russian aggression and the illegal invasion of Russia to Ukraine. Distinguished friends, my reference to the need for reforms, to the structure and implementation mechanism of decision taken by the UN, does not only arise from my assessment as to other international problems, but also from what my country still endures and suffers as a result of the Turkish invasion of Cyprus in 1974. It is with deep disappointment that I heard President Erdogan claiming that, and I quote, "As Turkey, we want all issues in the Aegean Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean to be solved with the framework of good neighborly relations and in conformity with international law." How ironic is it for the Turkish president to put forward such a claim when every day he threatens to overtake Greek islands, or when he commits thousands of violations of the airspace of the sovereign and neighboring country contrary to international law? How even more provocative is it to express the desire to resolve disputes in conformity with international law when he refuses to implement numerous resolutions of the United Nations on the Cyprus problem and creates new fait accompli? How much in conformity with international law is his refusal to abide by A, the General Assembly Resolution 3212 adopted in October 1974, which urges the speedy withdrawal of all foreign armed forces and foreign military presence and personnel from the Republic of Cyprus, and the cessation of all foreign interest in its affairs, interference in its affairs. B, a resolution which, endorsed by the Security Council Resolution 365 in December of the same year. C, the Security Council Resolution 1251 of 1999, which reaffirmed its position that Cyprus settlement must be based on a state of Cyprus with a single sovereignty, international personality, and a single citizenship, with its independence and territorial integrity safeguarded in a bizonal, bicommunal federation. It also stressed that such a settlement must exclude union in whole or in part with any other country or any form of partition or secession. Mr. Erdogan last year claimed that efforts should concentrate on reaching a settlement based on the so-called realities on the ground, whilst this year he spoke about the need for everyone to see the truth and that there are two distinct states and two distinct peoples on the island today. And I am wondering, dear friends, as to which truth is he talking about. The truth that 37% of the territory of the Republic of Cyprus, an UN and EU member state, remains under military occupation. Excuse me. The truth that after the Turkish invasion of 1974, 1/3 of the Greek Cypriots were forced to leave their ancestral homes. The truth that they have implanted hundreds of thousands of Turkish nationals to the occupied areas, thus altering the demographic character of the island, turning the Turkish Cypriot community into a minority in the areas they illegally occupy. The truth that Turkey has established an illegal entity in the occupied areas which is under its absolute political, economic, social, cultural, and religious control. An illegal entity, bear in mind, described by the European Court of Human Rights as a subordinate local administration of Turkey. Another question, the truth that Turkey tries to equate the state, the internationally recognized Republic of Cyprus, with the illegal secession entity. The truth that the above proclamation of the purported secession had been condemned by the Security Council and considered legally invalid. The truth that the Security Council called for its reversal, and for all states and the international community as a whole not to accept it or in any way assist it. The truth that they are trying to change the status of the fenced city of Famagusta, contrary to the UN Council resolutions 550 and 789. The truth that Turkey adopts its own arbitrary interpretation of international law, which reduces the exclusive economic zone of Cyprus by 44% at the expense of both Greek and Turkish Cypriots, contrary to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, as I have noted earlier, when decisions or resolutions based on international law are not to be implemented or enforced, then these, rightly so, could be perceived as fostering or even rewarding arbitrariness. This is actually what we are witnessing today with the Cyprus problem. Turkey, which systematically violates international law, calls on the international community to recognize its illegal fait accompli. Esteemed friends, unfortunately, this was the long-standing aim of Turkey ever since 1956. That is why, despite historical compromises by the Greek Cypriot side, all efforts on reaching a settlement of the Cyprus problem failed as a result of the intransigent stance and irrational demands of Turkey. The latest example being the conference on Cyprus held at Grand Montana in July 2017, during which, as regards the internal aspects of the Cyprus problem, the UN Secretary General assessed in his report on 28 September 2017 that and I quote, "the core outstanding issues related to governance and power sharing remained few, and that by the time the conference closed, the sides had essentially solved the key issues of effective participation." Thus, while the aim of the Secretary General to reach a strategic agreement was within close reach, the reason of their successful outcome was Turkey's inflexible stance and insistence on maintaining the anachronistic Treaty of Guarantee, the right of intervention, and the permanent presence of troops. And I would like, dear friends, to recall the UN Secretary General's statement of June 2017, in which he stressed that progress in this chapter of security and guarantees is an essential element in reaching an overall agreement. Following a period of stalemate, and despite our disappointment, we undertook new initiative to resume the process from where it was let off at Grand Montana, culminating to the joint understanding reached with the UN Secretary General and the then Turkish Cypriot leader on November 25th, 2019, which reaffirmed the principles for the resumption of a new round of talks, namely the joint declaration of 11 February 2014, the prior convergences, and the six-point framework the UN Secretary General presents at Grand Montana. Regrettably, once again, Turkey undermined the prospect of resuming the negotiating process, and instead, in the meeting held in Geneva in April 2021, they presented their position for changing the agreed basis of a settlement from a federal solution to a two-state solution. Dear friends, nonetheless, our side undertook another initiative, which also led to a new joint meeting of the leaders of the two communities with the Secretary General in September last year, during which it was agreed that the Secretary General would proceed with the appointment of an envoy in order to deliberate with both sides and all interested parties so as to reach common ground for a new peace process to resume. Excuse me. Yet again, Turkey refused to uphold the said agreement. We also continue taking initiatives to break the impasse through a letter I had sent to the Turkish Cypriot leader in May 23 this year, by which I conveyed constructive proposals for the adoption of bold confidence building measures, of win-win confidence building measures, measures which unfortunately were immediately rejected by the Turkish Cypriot side, which submitted counter-proposals in line with their aim for a two-state solution. Based on the above mentioned, I believe that it's clear that the Greek Cypriot community has exerted and will continue to exert every possible effort for the resumption of the talks in order to reach a settlement based on the United Nations resolutions. And as I have emphasized, the only way forward in resolving conflicts and for peace to prevail is none other than the unwavering adherence to international law and the UN Charter, not as arbitrarily interpreted by those who seek to disguise their revisionist aspiration. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, during my 10-year tenure, I might not have been able to enjoy what the vast majority would have also wished: the necessary reforms of the international organization, the resolution of international conflicts, and tackling challenges that affect hundreds of millions of people, such as hunger, poverty, and climate change. I might have not been able to see my homeland reunited with my Greek and Turkish Cypriot compatriots living in conditions of peace, prosperity, and stability. However, I earnestly hope that during my lifetime, I will be able to witness a better and more stable future for humanity. Thank you for your understanding.
En nombre de la Asamblea, agradezco al presidente de la República de Chipre la declaración que acaba de
On behalf of
formular
the
y pido
Assembly,
al
I should
protocolo
like
que
to thank
acompañe a su
His
excelencia.
Excellency for the statement we have just
La
heard, and I
Asamblea
request
escuchará
protocol to
ahora
escort His
un
Excellency.
discurso
The
del
Assembly will now hear an
excelentísimo
address by
señor
His Excellency
Nikinike Furuvararu,
Nikenike
presidente
Vurubaravu,
de la República
President of the
de
Republic of Vanuatu.
Pido a protocolo
I
que
request
acompañe a su
protocol to
excelencia.
escort His Excellency.
En nombre de la Asamblea General, tengo el honor de dar
On
la
behalf of the General
bienvenida al
Assembly, I have the
excelentísimo
honor to
señor
welcome His Excellency
Nikenike
Furubaravu,
presidente de la República de Vanuatu,
President of
y
the
de
Republic of
invitarlo
Vanuatu,
a
and to
dirigirse a la
invite him
Asamblea.
to address the Assembly.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, it is my great honor and privilege to speak for the first time as the President of the Republic of Vanuatu in this important body, the United Nations General Assembly. Let me start by congratulating His Excellency Sapa Korossi on assuming the presidency of the 77th session of the General Assembly. I assure you that during your tenure, my delegation will work closely with you to implement the agenda you set in this session. Mr. President, your vision for the United Nations 77th General Assembly is fitting to address the myriad of global issues that confront us today. I would also like to extend my sincere gratitude to His Excellency Abdullah Shahid for his stellar leadership as the President of Hope of the 76th session during an unprecedented and tumultuous year. Your inspiring work for humanity has left a strong impression here at the United Nations and around the world. Mr. President, today the world is facing a profusion of mounting challenges, many of which are inextricably linked. We are slowly recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, but recovery is becoming ever more difficult with rising debt levels and the looming inflation caused by the supply chain disruptions and rise of prices of fuel and food resulting from the Russia-Ukraine crisis. These challenges pose a major risk of global recessions and add to the rising humanitarian crisis that we have already faced with. As we gathered here, more families around the world are finding it extremely difficult to put food on the table, pay their bills and rent, and to meet the basic necessities. These hardships can be avoided by deploying smarter diplomacy and appropriate macroeconomic policies. These challenges are more harder compounded by an existential climate crisis that is already devastating our economies and our ecosystems. Over the past years, we have witnessed record heat, wildfires, severe hurricanes, coral bleaching, rising sea levels, prolonged droughts, and record floodings. The global challenge that we are facing impacts the poor and the vulnerable the hardest. Without adequate basic social safety nets and fundamental human rights protection, their future is uncertain. Mr. President, every day we are experiencing the debilitating consequences of the climate crisis, and the world is now demanding more ambitious action on climate at every level. This emergency is of our own making, is now affecting all people, those from the poorest to the richest nations. No one is immune to the extreme weather events now ravaging our islands, cities, and states. No one can escape the rising tides. Our youth are terrified of the future world we are handing to them through expanding fossil fuel dependency, compromising intergenerational trust and equity. Mr. President, fundamental human rights are being violated as we begin measuring climate change not in degrees of Celsius or tons of carbon, but in human lives. The time is up. Action is required now. And that is why the nations of the Blue Pacific continent are leading a global initiative to bring climate change to the International Court of Justice, the only principal UN organ that has not yet been given an opportunity to weigh in on the climate crisis. We believe that bringing climate change to the ICJ is a global public good and will further support the progressive development of international law. In this very hall, working in solidarity with UN member countries, we will ask the ICJ for an advisory opinion on existing obligations under international law to protect the rights of present and future generations against the adverse impacts of climate change. We believe that legal clarity from the world's highest court will help to spur even greater climate action and strengthen the Paris Agreement. We believe in the norms and rule of international law, and we firmly believe that our existing international laws and conventions already contain critical protections for human rights and for the environment. Taking climate change to the ICJ via the General Assembly is not a silver bullet for increasing climate action, but only one tool to get us closer to the end goal for a safe planet for humanity. The leader of the Pacific Islands community to continue to demonstrate higher levels of climate ambition and collective action. That is why, beyond the ICJ, we are supporting several other tools to battle the existential threat of climate change. We call on states to join the group of nations proposing to include the crime of ecocide in the Rome Statutes. Acting with knowledge of severe and widespread or long-term damage to the environment can no longer be tolerated. The future of tomorrow, we are the guardians of that future. I acknowledge, congratulate, and commend the work of the Commission of the Small Islands States led by Antigua and Barbuda, Tuvalu and Palau, to bring the issue of climate change as it relates to the law of the sea to the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea. We call for the development of a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty to face down coal, oil, and gas production in line with 1.5 degrees Celsius and enable a global just transition for every worker, community, and nation with fossil fuel dependence. It is critical that states must revise and enhance their nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement, as Vanuatu has completed last month, as we agreed in the Glasgow Pact at COP26. As you see, we are leaving no stones unturned as we seek solution to this climate crisis. And I particularly call on member states to support Vanuatu and our global coalition as we bring an ICJ climate change resolution before the General Assembly this season. Mr. President, the nuclear risk still remains and presents an existential threat for human species and all forms of life that inhabits the Earth. The nuclear risk is becoming even greater given the Ukraine-Russia war and the intense geopolitical tensions rapidly evolving before us. The lack of consensus on the recent Non-Proliferation Treaty review makes it difficult to achieve nuclear disarmament. This division reveals that the NPT as a central pillar of international rules-based pillar is not seen as a priority by certain nuclear powers. This is a major cause of concern for our planet. Mr. President, just like most countries in the world, my country, Vanuatu, was affected by COVID-19 pandemic. Our economy is heavily dependent on tourism, and this was halted when the borders were closed. Our economic activity significantly declined, and households' livelihoods were severely affected. We have been fortunate that the labor mobility programs that we enjoy with Australia and New Zealand has allowed Vanuatu to export these services, enabling remittance flows that has helped household income and boosted our economy. Furthermore, since most of the population resides in the rural areas, the subsistence economy has been able to sustain the livelihoods of our population. To avert economic decline and social hardships, the government responded by implementing stimulus packages that targeted household incomes and provided finance to the business sector to keep their businesses afloat. The government has been able to do this because of accumulation of budget surpluses over the years. The government launched a nationwide COVID-19 pandemic program allowing distributions of essential supplies before COVID reached Vanuatu, and as a result, only a few deaths were experienced. And as such, the vaccines rate, as soon as vaccine rates reached 70% of the total population, the borders were reopened. On this note, and on behalf of the government and people of Vanuatu, I would like to convey my gratitude to all our bilateral